So good evening, and welcome to Trinity United Church as we strive to be the heart in the heart of Huntsville. We're glad you're here tonight as we explore a topic called MAID, Medical Assistance in Dying. Back there. Now, we're not going to be able to cover every single thing on this topic, but we will attempt to lay the groundwork for some fruitful discussions and hopefully around the kitchen table and living room going forward. Typically, death is not a topic that we really want to embrace. I mean, if you want to have a conversation stopper, well, usually you just tell them what you do. If you tell them that you're calling, I don't know, calling Mitchell, I'm sure if she said that she works with a funeral home, that sort of may lead to some interesting discussions, or maybe it shuts down very quickly. But death doesn't have to be a taboo. Death is a natural part of our life cycle. We are all mortal creatures, and we all have a finite timeline. So tonight we're going to talk about death, and we're going to talk about dying. In particular, we're going to talk about having some control over how and when we want to die. Now, MAID is a personal choice, and it's a complex and sometimes controversial issue. So tonight, our speakers are going to try to unpack this issue for us. And I have to stress that this is an information session only. Nobody is going to try to sell you on anything or to get you to sign up like some kind of timeshare. It's simply a chance for people to hear about things like who qualifies? Is MAID legal? Yes. Can I change my mind? Yes. Where can I find help? So let's jump in. I'm going to introduce you to our presenters. They will speak up to about 20 minutes, and then we're going to open the floor for questions and discussion. Our first presenter is Lynn McGregor. Lynn, you can put your hand up. And her husband, Rob, decided to have MAID when he was diagnosed with terminal brain cancer. And she's also going to share the perspective of her daughter, Nicole, on seeing her father die in this manner. Lorraine Sild, at the end. Lori is a 25-year plus registered nurse, and she's going to share some of her stories when it comes to patient care and end-of-life treatment. And our final speaker, Dr. Allison Small. Now, she will be sharing a little bit of her personal journey and her initial struggles of wrestling with this topic. After all, there's the Hippocratic Oath of do no harm. So Dr. Small is going to share with us how she was able to reach a place of peace in getting on board with MAID. And she will also share some logistics about how the MAID process works. So without further ado, Lynn McGregor.
Thanks, Diane. Over the years, my late husband Rob Atfield and I have followed the issue of medical assistance in dying as it was discussed at various times by the Canadian government. MAID became legal in Canada in 2016. We believe MAID should be available for patients who are terminally ill and who want control over the end of their life. Neither of us thought that one day, due to a fatal disease, one of us would be faced with making a decision about MAID. In late September 2020, Rob wasn't feeling well and consulted with his physician. On October 1st, 2020, in the thick of COVID-19 restrictions, a CT scan at Huntsville Hospital revealed he had a brain tumor. He was admitted to Toronto General Hospital later that day, and a biopsy a few days later brought the news that Rob had an inoperable stage 4 glioblastoma, a fatal cancerous brain tumor. Our first reaction was absolute shock, disbelief, and numbness. Rob was referred to the oncology unit at Royal Victoria Hospital in Barrie for prescribed radiation and chemotherapy. We Googled the Mayo Clinic website for glioblastoma and found that the final stages were horrific. During a consultation with the oncologist, he confirmed that that was correct. Rob and I had discussed his wish to get approval for MAID, now it was real, and the oncologist signed the necessary form to start the approval process. The approval process consists of written assessments by 2 independent practitioners and the patient's written and signed request. There was peace of mind for both of us to know Rob's request for MAID was being put in place. Although radiation and chemotherapy over several months helped initially, neither was successful. Steroids brought Rob a few extra months, although they were very hard on his body. Suffering and knowing you're going to get better is one thing. Needless suffering in your final months and days is another. Rob was into quality of life, not quantity. He wanted control over his life and death. I totally supported his wishes, and with MAID in place, it gave me a sense of peace that Rob had decided. That Rob could decide when he had enough, he could choose a date. Determined to live our lives as normal as possible under the circumstances, we found it was best to keep our various activities going. He continued going to his weekly 7 a.m. Rotary meetings for several months, played organ and piano for services here at Trinity, enjoyed visits and phone calls with family and friends, and kept up with emails and texts until the tumor affected his vision. An accomplished organist and pianist, he wanted to leave a legacy of his music, and 7 months after his diagnosis, he recorded beautiful piano and organ music on a CD here at Trinity. It's a real treasure to have this CD. Oh, and we moved house while all this was going on. How he found the strength to help with packing, etc. was beyond belief. It was heartbreaking to watch him struggle with daily life, but he was determined to get the most he could from his remaining time. I know there were a great many times when he said he was okay, but he was really feeling awful, and he thought it would lessen the effects on him. Rob wanted to do one last trip and decided he'd like to see Montreal again, and we enjoyed several days there. Nearly 15 months into this journey, ravaged by the effects of the tumor and steroids, Rob's condition started to deteriorate drastically. Somehow we managed to get through Christmas and New Year. In consultation with Dr. Small on January 3, 2022, Rob decided he'd had enough and wanted his pain and suffering to end. It was decided that the appointed time would be 3 days, January 6. A quick email to immediate family with the date allowed those who wished to visit to do so. On January 6, Reverend Diane visited with the 3 of us. At the appointed time, Dr. Small came in and said, "Rob, are you ready to do this?" And he replied, "I'm more than ready." And she administered the drugs. Our daughter Nicole and I were with him, and we had his CD playing, and he had a peaceful death after months of bravely dealing with the ravages of the tumor. His death was a blessed release for him and a relief for us, as he was no longer suffering. Yes, it was very difficult and sad to say goodbye to the special man I shared 40 years with, but it would have been hard still to sit by and watch him continue to suffer until his body gave out. MAID is a deeply personal and complex issue, but for our family, it meant Rob could pass away peacefully with dignity and on his terms. The 15-month journey took place while many COVID-19 restrictions were in place. We greatly appreciated the care that Rob got at Huntsville Hospital, Toronto Western, Royal Victoria and Barrie, and from visiting nurses. Words don't adequately express how grateful we were for the support and many kindnesses received from family, friends, Trinity's congregation, and the community at large. Our daughter Nicole has written a few notes, and I'll just read those for you. She's early 20, so this is a different perspective. My first experience with MAID came from my grade 12 English teacher. He had our class read Tuesdays with Maury to give us an understanding of terminal illness and how long and challenging of a journey it can be. He had us write a paper about our thoughts on death once we finished reading the book. He then gave us an article about the legalization of MAID in Canada and had us write another paper about our opinions as to whether or not it was a justified law. I don't remember what I wrote, but I know that I was in support at the time. A little over a week after my dad's diagnosis, I sat down with him and we had a long conversation. Eventually I brought up MAID. I wasn't very familiar with glioblastoma, but I knew enough to be aware that things were going to get really difficult for him. I knew my dad and that he'd do his best to put on a brave face and be positive, but I also knew that cancer is a horrible disease. I told him that I knew about MAID and that I would support him if he decided to make use of it when he felt the time was right. There was no way my grade 12 teacher could have known any of his students would have a personal experience with MAID 4 years after attending his course. I'm thankful, though, that he made what some people might have considered a controversial decision to include it in his curriculum. I'm thankful that he gave me the tools to be understanding and accepting of it. I'm not sure I would have known much about it otherwise. The duration of my dad's illness was filled with uncertainty and anxiety for me. I was living in Toronto for school and thought about my dad every day. I was always worried something might happen while I was away. When the time came and things got really difficult, I was home on Christmas break. He made the decision and the date was set a few days before I was supposed to return to school. I feel lucky that I had the opportunity to be present when my dad passed. My dad made the decision and our family was able to say goodbye our way. We were all in control. We were able to prepare ourselves and we understood what was going to happen. My dad loved candy, so we gave him some chocolate, his favorite. We played the CD he created with his close musical friends. We talked to him and made sure he knew how much we loved him. I don't think that my dad could have had a better send-off. I know that anything less would not have felt right for me. I can't tell you exactly what I'd write if I were prompted to write the same grade 12 paper today. What I do know is that I would still absolutely be in support of MAID and that I believe it should be more widely supported. We all just want to have dignity and be in control of our lives. So I'll just end with a couple of words. Carpe diem, friends.
I'd like to call upon Lori now to give us a perspective from the nursing side of things, patient care, and end-of-life treatment.
Hi, good to see everybody. I've been a registered nurse in the hospital system in Ontario for 25 years. Now retired, I've had lots of time to reflect on things. I've seen many deaths. And in attempting to write this, I've kept in mind the things you really need to know about MAID and DNR, do not resuscitate, and how it all works. I'll try to impart to you how things work from the inside, the part you don't get to see as a bystander, family, or friend. I started my career in a psychiatric inpatient unit in Toronto for schizophrenic patients for a couple of years. From there, I went to a medical surgical post-op work and palliative care for about 15 years. Then 4 years in transplant units, both overseas and in Ontario, and then 5 years in coronary intensive care and medical surgical intensive care in Toronto. How many good deaths have I seen in my career? What I would consider a good death, the kind of death that I would want to have, where family and friends are close by and you get to go peacefully and calmly. I've seen maybe 3 or 4. I know, sad. Here's how things usually go when someone dies in the hospital. One of 3 ways. The patient is usually elderly and has already spent weeks or months in the hospital or nursing home waiting for the inevitable. They usually die alone, sometimes at night, succumbing to their ailments, sometimes miserably, sometimes in their sleep, almost always alone. The nurse or doctor then calls the family and they come in to view the body, and the funeral home is called. The body is transported to the morgue. This scenario will only happen if the patient has an up-to-date DNR written by the doctor, meaning, or do not resuscitate order, meaning that if the patient dies, the staff will not take action to try to resuscitate them. The second scenario can be quite a bit more frantic. Perhaps the patient is unconscious and has no DNR written. Perhaps they are young or elderly. Perhaps they've had an accident, or maybe they have cancer, or maybe they've had a heart attack, or a ruptured aneurysm, or any other serious condition that has killed them. They are now receiving CPR from hospital staff. You are an onlooker, but have been shooed from the room. One of the doctors frees herself from the chaos in the room and comes out to speak to you about what the family's wishes are. You have the medical power of attorney for the patient. Perhaps you have discussed the patient's wishes with them beforehand, and you know exactly what to say. The DNR is quickly written, the CPR stops, the respiratory therapist plans to intubate and put them on a ventilator is aborted. The rest of the family is called in. The staff leave you alone to begin the grieving process. The patient has died with a great deal of chaos and confusion around them, but has died alone with strangers attending to them. The third scenario, the most dramatic of all, happens when there is no DNR written and no plans for MAID, medically assisted dying. The family decides the action to be taken since the patient is unconscious. The family is at odds because half of them want everything done to keep them alive no matter what, and the other half want a DNR to be written. Sometimes these family decisions leave long-lasting splits between family members that may never be resolved. Maybe you yourself have been involved with one of these very difficult decisions about a loved one's medical care. The patient may even have had an advanced directive. Advanced directives or living wills are not always abided by because they are not actually legally binding, last time I checked. So now, the family has been made to decide on who will be the power of attorney and make the decision of how to proceed. This happens in a quiet room of the hospital, sometimes with a great deal of family angst, chaos, anger, and fear. The decision is made to do everything possible to help the patient so they don't die. The family is not ready for the death to occur. The patient is transported to the ICU. CPR continues. The family is asked to remove themselves from the room while the staff work on them. Many medical staff run into the room. It's a full code blue. Machines and crash carts are pulled into the room. Paddles are brought out, and the patient is shocked, perhaps many times. The action of CPR has perhaps crushed ribs and sternum. IVs are started, central lines are started in the patient's neck for invasive monitoring to begin. The patient is hooked up to cardiac monitoring. At the same time, the patient is intubated with a tube that goes into the trachea and is hooked up to a ventilator machine that breathes for the patient. Also at the same time, IV emergency drugs are administered. Cardiac rhythms are checked. More drugs are administered. An arterial line is started in the wrist to continuously monitor blood pressure, and blood gases are sent off to the lab staff to see if the ventilation is working properly. Foley catheter is inserted into the bladder to check the patient's urine output. Later in the day, blood work shows the patient's kidneys are shutting down. Continuous dialysis is started through a special AV fistula, another invasive procedure. More machines are brought into the room. Many more IV lines are started for continuous emergency drugs to be administered. The patient is continuously kept sedated so they don't wake up and pull their lines out. Sometimes their wrists are tied to the bed. Finally, a half a day later, the family is allowed into the room to view the patient. It is not possible now to talk with the patient because they are heavily sedated and also may be unconscious from their original condition. Finally, the patient is stabilized and monitoring continues. They are kept alive because of machinery and drugs and well-intentioned care from staff. The wait begins to see if the patient will respond to treatment. This can take many days, weeks, or even months of hospital stay. The recovery will be slow if it happens at all. They may have brain injury from lack of oxygen. Needless to say, this is a very chaotic scenario no one would ever want to be part of. It can happen in a variety of ways, and the amount of chaos can be less or more depending on the family involvement or the skill of the staff. Once in the ICU, I saw a very lovely death of an elderly man. He and his family were Hindu from India. The patient had been through this chaos of medical care and lived. He was on a ventilator, so couldn't speak with the family, but through using a letterboard, had told the family he was ready to die. He wanted the tubes removed and to be allowed to die naturally. His wishes were carried out. He did not die immediately when the ventilator was removed. His breathing was labored, however, so he was kept comfortable with various medications and morphine for his own comfort. The several days it took him to die, he was attended by family members who surrounded his bed and sang to him with lovely songs and prayers in a language I did not understand. The patient was awake and could talk in whispers. The family sang to him in loving ways until his passing 6 days later. It was the most loving, best death I have ever seen. I have become acutely aware over the years that I worked as a nurse, that so many people do not have the privilege of dying this way or anything at all like it, with the exception of those in hospice care and in special buildings and units of hospitals. It could be so much different. Imagine this. An elderly person has a dangerous heart condition. More treatment for him would be very invasive and painful. He has come to know that his death is imminent and has come to terms with his own death. He is ready to die when the time comes. He has spoken with his family about how he feels about his own death. The family knows no more treatment is wanted. He asked his family doctor about MAID, medically assisted dying. He has an assessment period and has qualified for MAID. A date is chosen. The family takes some time off from work to be with him in his final days. They gather around him, and last words are spoken, memories are shared, laughter and shouting can be heard coming from the room, tears are cried, the family says goodbye, grieving ensues. The doctor comes, the injections are administered. The family is together to grieve with one another. The family dog and cat provide comfort at home. The wake and funeral, which have been prearranged, take place. Life goes on. No matter how someone dies, the family will remember it forever. Whether it happens with apathy on part of the family, or in a great deal of drama and family fighting, or peacefully in a hospital or hospice room, it has an effect that lasts forever. Here's something to consider. What about the effect on healthcare workers? I know what you're thinking. Well, they are specially trained not to be affected by things like death or trauma, or extremely invasive medical procedures, or chaotic scenes of all kinds that they've been witness to. But doctors, nurses, and therapists of all kinds are people too. We have feelings too, no matter how much training we have. We come to care about our patients. We are human. Has anyone noticed there's an acute shortage of healthcare workers these days? How we are treated as healthcare workers in the healthcare setting is important too, however inconvenient that may be. We remember also how patients die, how families and patients are treated. It has an effect that lasts forever for us too. We are not immune. Maybe healthier ways of helping people die can have a positive effect here too. Maybe we can all work together to implement these changes respectfully. Lastly, I wanted to mention some of the misinformation I've heard about MAID. Just from some of the conversations that I've had from people. Of course, there's the case of the Canadian veteran who had MAID suggested to him as a viable option to end his suffering when reaching out for help from a Veterans Affairs worker. I believe this was a case of a very misinformed caseworker. It should not have happened. No one should ever suggest MAID as an option for someone. It must come from the person themselves after a range of soul searching, and only if their condition is terminal. Another one I've heard is that family can have MAID performed upon you against your wishes if you become ill. Of course, this is not true. You cannot be coerced into it or have it done against your will. Many laws are in place to prevent this from happening. I've also heard from people with disabilities that they feel vulnerable. They may think their caregivers can ask for MAID for them because they are tired of caring for them. This is not true, and maybe the caregivers and the disabled ones need a little more help to be able to cope and keep on going. There is a misconception from a lot of families that having everything done for their loved ones is the best option, even if they are terminal. They don't want to give up the hope no matter what the situation. This may be because they have seen something like this on TV. It might be the only time they've ever seen a person die is on a TV program or a movie. Or it might be because they are wholly unprepared to go through their own grieving process for the loved one. From my perspective, in the case of a loved one dying, their wishes should be taken into consideration and acted upon, even if it is uncomfortable for the family. To think of someone else's needs before your own is one of the most unselfish things you will ever do. Please don't make a loved one suffer needlessly to prevent your own discomfort of grieving for them. Thank you for listening and being part of the forum.
Thank you, Lori. And now I'm going to call upon Dr. Allison Small. We have the fans.
Diane said, my name is Allison Small. I'm a family physician in town. I'm much more of an informal speaker, but when left to my own devices talking about MAID, I can go on for 2 hours, and Diane says I have 20 minutes. So I apologize, but it's a scripted speech I wrote, and I will do my best to stay under the time limit.
I have hope.
That's what I heard. There is one, but Lynn said I could have some of her time. Right, okay. So as a family physician, I provide cradle-to-grave care. I look after newborns, and I look after people in their last moments on this earth. And some days, I visit the newest member of my practice, and I say goodbye to the oldest member of my practice. And I've always included palliative care as part of my practice. In our medical community, we often talk about people having a good death. And a good death looks differently for everybody. For some, it is having excellent palliative care and symptom control. For others, it is passing quickly and peacefully. For others, it is having the people they love at their bedside. And for still others, in recent years, it is having a medically assisted death. Medically assisted death is not for everyone, and for many, it is an uncomfortable and even an unthinkable conversation to have. Everyone, though, should know all of their options for end-of-life care so that when the time comes, and the time will come for all of us, they can experience what they see as a good death, whatever their version of a good death may be. My goal tonight is not to debate whether MAID or should not exist. It exists and it's legal. My goal, though, is to provide information around the legal, medical, and human aspects of MAID. And I hope to clear up some of the misconceptions about MAID. There are lots of misconceptions in the public, but when I speak to my own colleagues in the healthcare profession, there are lots of misconceptions there as well. The only way we can make informed choices for ourselves is if we are equipped with all of the proper information. MAID became legal in 2016, and I became a MAID provider in 2018. As with most things in small town medicine, a need was identified for assessors and providers, and I began to seriously think about whether this was something I could do. Like most providers, when MAID was being discussed at the federal level, and even when it became a legal entity, I struggled to understand how we as providers could provide MAID and still uphold our Hippocratic oath of do no harm. I remember one of my mentors recounting a conversation he'd had with his daughter about MAID. She was in favor of MAID and spoke of patients' rights. His response was, what about the people who have to provide MAID? How do you think they might feel? I took these words to heart. How would I feel being asked to end somebody's suffering and ultimately end their life? What followed was much soul-searching and praying in the hopes there would be a sign or at least a sense of peace indicating that I was really meant to do this work. Even the morning of my first provision, while the team was getting ready, I was in the chapel praying and reading over the hymn book and letting those familiar words wash over me. And I left the chapel that morning with a sense of calm, knowing that this was important work and I was definitely meant to do it. Since that early morning in 2018, I have attended numerous provisions, every one of them unique, every one of them peaceful and painless, every one of them dignified and beautiful, every one of them surrounded in love, tears, and often laughter. In my 20 years of medicine, I can honestly say these are some of the most beautiful deaths I have seen. I have been to deaths where they have created a party atmosphere, they've set up a bar, they've got the puppies on the bed. People make it what they want to make it, and often it is much a celebratory atmosphere when I get there. In 2021, I attended my own dad's provision. Being on the other side of MAID has strengthened my empathy and compassion for families present at their loved ones' deaths, and I can definitely relate on a level that many others cannot. At every provision, I am keenly aware of what I'm being asked to do and what a privilege it is for me to be present when someone is at their most vulnerable. I am privileged to witness someone's last words, someone's last gestures of love, and a family's deep love and grief. It is not something I undertake lightly, and my drives to and from my provisions are frequently used for silent and personal reflection. MAID isn't for every patient, nor is it for every healthcare provider. It is a deeply personal decision. And the law recognizes this and makes provision for conscientious objectors within the healthcare profession. In the case of physicians, if they object to MAID, they are still obligated to provide a referral to someone willing to assess and provide for MAID. They cannot stand in their patient's way of accessing The process for accessing MAID contains many safeguards, both for assessors and patients. The process starts with an assessment, where we ensure that patients meet all of the eligibility criteria set out in the legislation and criminal code. When I do an assessment, almost universally, I hear things like, I just don't want to suffer. Or, I'm dying, why prolong the inevitable? Or, I don't want to be a burden on my family. Or, I don't want to languish in a coma with my family forced to sit watching me die. And almost without exception, family members will tell me that much as they don't want to lose their loved one, they definitely support the right to choose how they die, and they don't want them to suffer. That support families give their loved one is such a beautiful gift. In every assessment, I speak to people about alternatives to MAID, including palliative care for symptom management and palliative sedation. I emphasize that there are many ways to alleviate suffering, but I also emphasize that not all dying involves suffering. In the case of what we call track 2 cases, where their death is not reasonably foreseeable, I often work with specialists and family physicians to ensure that all options for treatments have been explored. And a number of these assessments have resulted in better quality of life for patients and their subsequent withdrawal for their request for MAID. So just because you get referred to our team doesn't mean that that's how you're going to end your life. Under the current legislation, to qualify for MAID, people must have a grievous and irremediable physical illness which causes them intolerable suffering, and they must be in an advanced state of decline. In plain English, they must have a big bad ugly illness that we can't fix, and for which there are no treatments left, and for which the person identifies horrible suffering, whether that be physical suffering or psychological suffering. They must make their request voluntarily. This cannot come from a power of attorney, and it can only come from the person who wishes to have MAID. And they must have capacity to make that request. These criteria apply to every person requesting MAID. Under the original legislation, back in 2016, patients' natural death had to be reasonably foreseeable. The government does not tell us what naturally foreseeable or reasonably foreseeable is, and so that is subject to some interpretation, but most would say a year at the most. Under the current legislation, which was updated in 2021, people whose natural death is not reasonably foreseeable can still qualify for MAID, provided they meet all of the other eligibility criteria. Under the original legislation, people had to have capacity on the day of their death, which often led to hospice and hospital staff and their home care staff withholding medications to ensure that they would have capacity. But this also resulted in suffering because they would withhold sedatives and pain medications. Under our current legislation, those who qualify with a reasonably foreseeable natural death can sign a waiver of consent such that on the day of their death, if they are no longer capable of consent, they can still proceed with a provision. Those who are not dying immediately cannot sign one of those waivers. It's important to note that if an assessor does not feel a patient meets all of their criteria, they can deny the request. At that point, patients have a right to request another assessment. In some cases, there could be uncertainty around eligibility. And in our local community, we've often gotten 3 and 4 assessments in cases that just were not clear. In at least one instance, we have reached out to an assessor in another town to ensure objectivity. Current legislation does not allow MAID as an advanced directive, so you cannot put it in your will. You cannot say, I don't want CPR and I want to have MAID if I have a debilitating stroke. And you can't put it to say, I have dementia now, and if I get to the point where I don't know my own family, I would like to have MAID. People under 18 do not qualify for MAID. People where mental health is the sole underlying cause of their request also do not qualify. However, the legislation is supposed to be reviewed in March of 2024, and we anticipate that it will address mental health and advanced directives. What that will look like, nobody really knows. But provinces are starting to get ready, trying to anticipate what the government might do. They may also push it off another year like they did last year. Physicians and providers across the country have identified several challenges should this new legislation pass. Lack of access to psychiatrists, lack of psychiatrists willing to be assessors, determining if patients must try all available treatments or only those acceptable to them, as is the case with physical illness, come on video to? And who determines when to do a provision based on the Advanced Directives? All huge questions. All of them make us uncomfortable. When somebody makes a request for MAID, that request is passed along to one of our local assessors. These requests may be passed along from a local physician. Patients consult with her. Or our MAID coordinator may pass them along to us as well. They then undergo 2 independent medical assessments and are required to submit a written, signed, and witnessed request. The assessments involve not only speaking with the person requesting MAID, but also reviewing their medical records, reaching out to their family physician, reaching out to other physicians that have been involved in their care, and ensuring that all of the eligibility criteria have been met. Once deemed eligible, they can proceed at any time if their death is reasonably foreseeable. Those whose death is not reasonably foreseeable require a minimum 90-day assessment period, during which time assessors work to ensure that no stone has been left unturned in terms of consultations and treatment options before deeming someone eligible. A number of these track 2 assessments have resulted in better quality of life for patients and their withdrawal gains. In Ontario, both an oral provision and an intravenous provision are both legal and covered, but the majority of people opt for an intravenous provision as there are numerous challenges and drawbacks to an oral provision. I believe since 2016 in Ontario there have been 4 total provisions by the oral method, and there are many are through the intravenous. All of these cases are reported to the coroner's office to allow for some level of oversight. It's Canada. Anything less than 200 years old is considered new, and we will be doing this for the foreseeable future. We review the case with them, and somebody from that office will call a family member after the provision to ensure that this is truly what their loved one wanted, that there were no concerns, and just to ensure that everything was done by the book. MAID doesn't occur under death certificate. This is important for some people. In Ontario, at least. In some provinces, it does. And I always tell people it will not appear on your death certificate. And so if you do not choose to share the method of your death with anyone, no one will ever know. It doesn't affect your insurance policies. It is considered a natural death. The choice to have MAID is deeply personal, and for many, it's a decision they choose not to share, given the wide range of opinions and emotions surrounding MAID. For families, this leads to a different grieving process, as they often feel they cannot share the details of their loved one's death. They feel unwarranted guilt or shame that they could have, should have done more to help their loved one. MAID is not the right choice for everyone, but for those who choose MAID, it often gives them back control over what is otherwise an uncontrollable disease and situation. Knowing they can have control at the end of their life provides many with an inner sense of peace, and for some, that's all they need, and they never end up moving forward with the provision. And I tell people all the time, just because you've had assessments doesn't mean that you'll move forward, and it's if and when you choose to proceed. Patients can change their mind at any time. Right up until the moment I start pushing medications, we can change their minds. All dying patients, regardless of their end-of-life plan, should receive palliative care and deserve excellent palliative care. Our team strives to educate people about all of their end-of-life options, not just MAID. If people choose MAID, our team strives to provide timely, empathetic, and compassionate care to patients and their families. If for whatever reason we are unable to provide MAID, we communicate directly with their palliative team to ensure ongoing, high-quality end-of-life care. Everyone lives their lives uniquely with their own path, beliefs, and values, and people should be allowed to die the way they live, uniquely, on their own path, with their own beliefs and values. For some, MAID has no place in their end-of-life plan. For others, MAID is a valuable option for them to have. There are no rights or wrongs, just what is right for you. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Small. Now we're going to open up the floor for questions and discussion. So I would ask you to direct your question to the particular individual that you would like to answer your question. Okay, Lori, Lynn, Dr. Small. And Alistair asked me to repeat the question so we could hear what was going on the line. So, the floor is open. Yes?
What happens if you don't have a family doctor or a doctor at all?
Okay, the question is, what happens if you don't have a family doctor? What way do you go then?
There is a provincial MAID hotline that you can call, and they will hook you up with a local team.
I didn't know that. I saw another hand. Yes.
I'm wondering if MAID is associated with, I guess Dr. Small, is MAID associated with death doulas or any other alternative personal caregivers?
Not locally that I know of. There's no reason it couldn't be, but if people want a death doula, they don't have to have MAID to have a death doula. I tell people when I'm coming to do a provision, I don't care who you have here, you have everyone that you want to have here. Just save you a place in the corner.
Okay, so the question was about death doulas. Now, maybe everybody is not familiar with a death doula. It's like a midwife for a mom who's giving birth. A death doula helps you as you die. And Dr. Small responded to that. You can have who you want.
Anybody you want, yep.
Okay, yes, this lady.
So Dr. Small was saying that in the spring, the government was going to revisit the Advanced Directive policy on MAID.
They're supposed to, yep.
Yeah. So who would we contact to put in our 2 cents for that?
Ma'am?
Somebody in the ministry. There's a committee that is meeting through the government, the federal government. I'm not an expert on this, but there's a committee that's meeting for the federal government, and there'll be provincial organizations who are going to try and figure out the fine points of the mental illness as a sole reason for MAID, as well as the Advanced Directives. So I think if you wanted to put your 2 cents in there, I would just Google the MAID committee for the Government of Canada, and that would probably put you in the right direction if you want to have they have taken information from various interest groups and the public, so I'm sure there's a way to find that out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Lady in the blue.
Thank you. Can you please tell me, probably Dr. Small would know this, what is the connection between Dying with Dignity Canada and MAID?
Dying with Dignity Canada is a huge supporter of MAID. They've existed much longer than MAID has, and they've always supported patients to die in the manner that they feel is best for them. There's not a lot of crossover, but certainly when we need witnesses for people's written requests, Dying with Dignity will send a volunteer witness to wherever that patient is and witness their request if that's needed. If you go on their website, they have lots of information about MAID. They've got all the forms that you might need to make a MAID request. So they're a staunch supporter, for sure, of the work that we do.
Could I follow up on that? I know that Dying with Dignity is a charitable organization, and they depend on donations for a lot of the work they do. So, that's just something I know about Dying with Dignity.
Do we have somebody else? Oh, yes. Hey, no stranger to the death and dying world.
Hi Hi ladies, thank you for being my tribe. This is my whole life speaking about this stuff. And you know what you're talking about is the fact that there are worse things than dying and that suffering. Lori had mentioned that people have to request MAID, we can't suggest it, but most people don't know about MAID. So Allison, Dr. Small, are physicians letting people know that this is an option? Because a lot of people don't know what MAID is.
So
And they have a right to know.
there is nothing in the legislation that says that it cannot be brought up. So there's nothing in the legislation that says that you cannot bring it up. The College of Physicians and Surgeons would probably prefer you not bring it up. However, I would say most physicians, not most physicians, but lots of physicians will mention it as part of your end-of-life care plan. I know of some physicians who, when their patient is leaving sick, sort of put that into place. You know, I'm a MAID provider. If the time came, is that a conversation you would ever want to have? And then they just put it on the front of the chart. Would never want to have that conversation or would want to have that conversation. Often we try to you pick up on a subtle cue from your patient. They'll say, I don't want to do this anymore, I'm tired. And I'll say, are you asking about? And then we'll have that conversation. But there's nothing that says you cannot bring it up. And often I'm quite surprised at the number of people who are unaware it even exists, even after 7 years. Certainly in hospital, no hospital employee is allowed by hospital policy to bring it up. But if they're picking up on cues, they will bring it to a physician who can then have that conversation.
Now, 30 seconds.
Good luck. So I would like clarification on someone who has really advanced dementia, who may have had it put in an advanced care. Like, dear Lord, please put me out of my misery and my family out of misery. I've watched a number of people at the tail end of dementia, and it's brutal to watch somebody that is just not there anymore and they're living in fear, or they're not even living. And so if it's in advanced care, that this is something that you wanted, can you do it?
Not currently. So under the current legislation, you must still be able to request it, and it cannot exist in this advanced directive. However, the legislation is supposed to change next March, and we anticipate that they will include advanced directives in that legislation.
Well, they have to, because they can't take care of the people that are in that.
But often, so here's where it gets mucky. Often people who are in advanced stages of dementia, there are those who are agitated and aggressive, but there are many, many who are pleasantly confused and quite happy. And you can make the argument that they're no longer suffering, in which case they are no longer eligible. So it is not as simple as saying, we think it should be an advanced directive. I think there are numerous pitfalls and potential issues with this, and it's going to have to be approached very carefully.
Can I put it in an advanced care, that if I have dementia and I come down with some illness like pneumonia, please don't treat it, or don't treat me for anything that might cause my death?
Yes. So you can say, if I am, well, but DNR doesn't mean don't treat, and DNR doesn't mean don't give antibiotics, but you can be exceedingly specific in your advanced care directives. You can say, I wouldn't want an IV, I wouldn't want fluids, I wouldn't want antibiotics. You can be as specific as you want to be in an advanced directive, absolutely.
Can I tell them, please don't feed me?
Yeah.
Perfect, okay.
So you can put anything on.
Well, for me personally, that's not living.
Yep.
And I've watched families have to attend, and it's just so hard.
And so, yeah, so right now your advanced directives can have everything up to MAID, and I anticipate next year you could probably include MAID.
Thank you.
Dr. Small, I have a friend whose mother passed away a few months ago in the hospital. She had already set up with her directive to have MAID, and when she started to decline, there might be some confusion, but her doctor was away at that time, so she couldn't get the second signature, I believe, and then missed out on having that type of end-of-life care, which was actually in her directive. So if there is a sudden decline and you're, like what happens if the second doctor isn't there? Like, is there any directive for MAID to follow through based on the original request, or any provisions if the doctor is away, like was in her situation? Or does it always, so do you always have to have the in the end two doctor signature?
So, I mean, I don't know the case, obviously. Do you have to have two assessments? For sure. Both have to be documented, and both have to have filled out the appropriate paperwork. If there is a rapid decline and the second assessor is not, the person who did that second assessment isn't around, often we will do our best to find another second assessor. Obviously, it's not always possible, unfortunately. But yes, you can't proceed without that second signature. But typically what we would do is scramble, try to find someone that would do a rapid assessment to allow her to access that. But it also depends. If there's a rapid decline, often they don't have the capacity to take part in that second assessment.
If two people did an assessment and said this is okay, we approve this, why is their word not taken 6 months later or whatever the timeline is? Why is that? Why do the two assessors need to be there at the time? I don't understand.
So
they already said it was okay.
They don't. But if 6 months prior, the first assessor had said, absolutely, we're good to go, and the second assessor had any doubts, or the second assessor said, I think you qualify, but from what you're telling me, I'm not confident that you have the suffering part, or you're at the advanced state of decline, and we need to reassess. What can happen is that they'll do their letter, but they won't fill out the appropriate consent form. And then, unfortunately, if there's a rapid, and with the plan to be, I'm going to come back and reassess. And we often don't see these people just once. I often am on the phone, a day a week calling people. I call people once a month to see how they're doing, to see if things are changing. It's sort of a dynamic process. And eligibility, they may be eligible and then not eligible if they lose capacity without that waiver in place. So if the second assessor wanted more time to assess and they rapidly declined and they weren't able to get that second assessment redone or determine that eligibility, then that may have cost them. It's not a perfect system, but we make it work as best we can.
Gentleman down here in the back.
Thank you. Could you be signed up for MAID, and when it comes time for the final decision to be made, could there be a doctor say, I disagree with this? Let's say that there must be some doctors who are not in agreement with MAID, unfortunately, but could one of those people stand up and say, no, I'm not ready to have Bruce put down yet?
I can only hope my own physician would say that, but she's a MAID provider, so it doesn't look good for me. Yes, your physician could stand up and say they don't agree, and they would say duly noted, but legally they cannot prevent you from proceeding with MAID. So they can object all they like, and they are well within their legal rights to object, but they cannot block your access to MAID. And so if your physician says,
I'm not ready yet, and you say, too bad, I am, your word would supersede theirs.
Thank you.
So I was involved recently with a lady who had signed her MAID and was in hospice. She hadn't put a date on because she just wasn't ready to put that date on. But one day she was fine, and 2 days later I went to see her, and her mind was completely gone. And that took MAID off the table because she hadn't put a date on. Is that accurate?
Sort of, but not really.
We're going into the gray zone now.
This is why our group provider has a text chain. If she had signed all her paperwork for MAID, but hadn't chosen a date, and hadn't signed a waiver of consent, then if she lost capacity, then yes, that negates her ability to access MAID, because without that waiver, you have to be capable the day you die.
So if she hadn't put a date, but she had signed the waiver, could her family have gone ahead?
So the waiver requires a date.
So if you put an advance date, and then you send it to keep us going?
So I'd say most of us would agree to setting a date 3 months in advance, and we would, if you weren't ready at that 3 months, we would reset it. I think most of us, though, if we'd done that twice, would probably, say, well, obviously we need to reevaluate or change things. But that waiver of consent requires you to sign a date, because the wording on that waiver is, if on or before the date on this form, I have lost capacity, then I would wish for Dr. Small to go ahead with the provision. That waiver, though, also says, if on that date I make any gesture of refusal, Dr. Small will not do it.
So even if her mind was gone,
And she
she
signed.
signed it.
But if
Says, no, I don't want
If you go to start the IV and she pulls away, or she makes any sign that you think they don't want to wish, or they don't wish to go ahead, then we don't go ahead.
Back. Get my steps in today.
Dr. Small, you're busy tonight. So would you suggest for somebody who feels strongly in support of MAID that they bring it up with their family physician if he or she doesn't, if it's something that's never mentioned? Okay.
And if that physician is not in favor, then that is the time for them to maybe look for another.
Good luck.
Yeah, what happens in that particular case?
So there are only 5 of us. We're a small group. Huntsville's a really small town, and all the physicians know each other. So if your physician is not, if your physician doesn't do MAID, and that would be probably all of the physicians except the 5 of us that do, they know who to reach out to. So if you could see when you're in full health, say, if the time were to come, I would want to talk about MAID, and can you make sure that we talk about it at that time? And they will say, sure, we can talk about it, or that's not really something I'm comfortable with, but when the time comes, don't worry, I'll find you someone. And so what happens is if you make that request to your family physician, if they don't know about MAID, if they don't do MAID, or whatever their views are on MAID, they just pick up the phone and call one of us. So I get referral letters probably every week, or phone calls. I have someone, can I talk to you about them? Would you be willing to see them? And so each of us, it's very informal. It's just a phone call usually. But they know exactly who to call. So you don't have to have a physician. You don't have to have a physician who's in support of MAID. They just need to know the right phone number to call, and I would say all of them in town know the right phone numbers.
You get through your receptionist?
Through my receptionist?
This is problem, to get to a doctor to talk to them, is getting through the receptionist.
So my receptionist, My receptionists get the messages on our machine, and I get a lot of messages that say, this person called, do you know them? Or this person called, MAID with a question mark. They just assume everyone that calls that isn't one of mine must be for MAID, and so they just put the messages through, and I call when I get them.
Nadia. You answered one of my questions, so there are 5 providers in Huntsville. And I have, actually I learned my doctor that I am interested in MAID when I can't function. But do you do MAID in homes as well as in the hospital? Or?
I'd say we do more home provisions than anywhere else. But we do them in homes, we do them at the nursing home, we've done them in the retired home. Yep, wherever somebody wishes to be, that's where we are.
Outside in the woods?
We have had someone do it outside someone's trailer in the woods on a lake, but they owned the camp. But if it was your own private property, absolutely.
The question was, could you have MAID outside of the hospital setting? And Dr. Small said, yes, you can have it anywhere. You could have it nursing homes, your own home. Okay. Campsite, somebody said campsite? That's a quarter meter.
You have to own it though. Legally, you have to own the place.
Oh, now that's a good point.
You can't just go to Arrowhead.
You just can't go to Arrowhead. Good to have laughter around this heavy, intense topic. That's right. Anybody else? Yes, Linda.
Well, this is more of a question for you guys. So I'm just kind of wondering, because I attend this church, and as do most of my family, go to church. And when we discuss this at all, the 10 commandments are brought up. And one of them being, thou shalt not kill. And I never, ever know what to say back. I don't anyway, because I don't discuss religion with hardly anyone, because I don't know enough. But what, from your perspective, how do you relate one of the commandments to MAID?
Dr. Small?
So only in our gallows humor local group do we talk about killing people. We prefer to think of it as ending suffering. And truly what has ended this person's life is their underlying horrific disease. All we have done is move the date maybe 1 or 2 days sooner. We just moved God's plan up a little bit. When I tell people, people ask me, what would God think? I tell them that's between them and God. It's between them and their minister. And we've had support of a number of ministers, and a number of ministers who've said to their congregants, that's not for me to decide, that's between you and God. But it's not something I didn't struggle with when I first started with this. But again, we don't think of it as killing people, we think of it as ending suffering and ending their life. But truly, these are people that are most of the time actively dying, and usually within hours to days of dying naturally.
So you're facilitating.
We're facilitating, exactly. I mean, for me, my dad was a staunch Anglican and very, very conservative. And so I actually never told him I was a MAID provider because I was fairly confident that that would be the end of our relationship. We often didn't agree on many of the controversial topics in life. And I was shocked to my very core when he was suffering, and I said, look, I know you miss Mom, but would you do anything to hasten your reunion? Worried more that he would commit suicide. And he said yes. And I had to sit down, and because he was so staunchly Christian and Anglican and so conservative. And he had soul searched and thought this through, and I think had talked to his minister and realized that MAID was the best choice for him, and he did not feel that that conflicted with any of his religious views. But that was a personal choice for him. Shocking, but personal choice for him. But that is what was best for him.
Canoe.
I wasn't going to speak because I was just here as an observer and a helper, and somewhat security. But one question I do have is, what's the difference between MAID and assisted suicide? And are you allowed to push your own button?
So often the terms medically assisted death and assisted suicide are used interchangeably. In the States, where it's only legal in some states and it is all oral, those people are written a prescription, they pick it up, they are given the medications to take at home, and they self-administer. In Canada, that is an option. But for the most part, it's done intravenously. And they're pretty big concentrations of medications, so I don't know that anyone will be able to administer themselves. So yes, the terms are used, they are used interchangeably, medically assisted death and medically assisted suicide. But I think most of us who do MAID would argue that this is not a suicide. These are not people intentionally ending their lives. These are people who've reached out for help, ending their suffering.
I understand that. What I've heard and just heard is that the machine could be set up to do the intravenous by a doctor and whatever, and the person just pushes the button and they and it does the job.
So that, I'm not aware of any of that in Canada. In Canada, it is all physician administered with the physician right there accessing the intravenous and pushing the medications. There's 4 different medications, so it would be very difficult to set that up. It may be different in other countries. There's only a few countries that legalize this, but in Canada, the physician is expected to be there in the room and administer the drugs themselves. You're right. Yeah. Even if someone does it orally, we are expected to stay. That's what I tell people. It might take hours if you do it orally, and the worst part of that is I have to sit in your living room for those numerous hours making awkward conversation with your family.
If I felt I was getting dementia, can I, at that time, it's just starting, sign the papers to say I don't want anything to bring me back, no food or anything? Will that stand, or do I still have to have my faculties later on?
Like for an advanced directive, just not wanting intervention?
Yeah.
No, that stands.
Well, but I don't have my faculties near the end.
So advanced directive is very different than MAID. Advanced directive, you have in your sound mind.
Okay, that's an important one.
Yep.
So an advanced directive is something that you have sat down, hopefully with your family, and gone through so that everybody in your family knows what your wishes are. So you've gone through and said, I do not wish to have CPR, I do not wish to be intubated. And more so, I do not wish to be force-fed, I do not wish to have a tube feed, I do not wish, and you can write all those things down with your family, and that will stand, and if your family loves you, they will honor all those things that you have written down, because it is not technically a legal document.
So you can if somebody was going to have dementia, then you could have this and,
Yep.
and that would stand.
Even if someone's not going to have dementia, I encourage people to have an advanced directive, so that God forbid something happens that is quite sudden and unexpected, people know what you wanted. So the advanced directive is you writing down, these are all the things that I would want or would not want. And if you do that with your family watching and in support, then they will hopefully honor those wishes.
So it's not a lawyer that draws it up?
An advanced directive does not have to be a lawyer, no. Your powers of attorney probably should be a lawyer, your will should be a lawyer, but a living will or advanced directive, you can buy a kit at Chapters.
And where would you put this advanced directive?
With your will. Or with your DNR certificate you have at home. That's somewhere that's easy to find.
I think I would do. Oh,
the DNR, should we get that written by the family doctor to have, like, now?
If your wishes are that you would not wish to be brought back to life, you can certainly get a DNR form that stays at home. And what that does is that, God forbid, you wake up dead one morning, or your family calls the police or they call the ambulance. If you do not have that in the home, the paramedics are obligated to do CPR. If that is in the home, they will come, they will see that, they'll express their condolences, and they will leave. So if your wishes are not to be resuscitated and you don't want your family to have to make horrific decisions in a stressful time, absolutely, you can ask your family physician for a DNR form. They'll fill it out with you, and you can just keep it at home.
Yeah, put it on the bridge.
I think I'm going to have DNR tattooed. I know this is about dying with dignity and MAID, and I wonder if you could maybe just tell us how we go about getting the forms for advanced care planning. Because I know you can do it online, you can just Google it or whatever. So could you just tell us how to do that?
You can, as I say, you can Google it on. I think, when I endeared myself to my in-laws and made my grandfather-in-law fill his out, I think we bought it at Chapters. Like, we bought it at one of the bookstores. So they're readily available. Your lawyer would help you draw it up as well. Probably for more than they will charge you at Chapters to buy the kit. But it can be bought anywhere. Online you can do it. You can buy the kits. They're pretty readily available.
There's an organization, Advanced Care Planning Ontario, and they have all the documents. I've done it with my friend here.
Okay, Kat, we're coming.
So just go to advancedcareplanningontario.ca, and they have all the forms there that you can fill out and print them off.
Such great information that we're getting here tonight. Somebody else had their hand up. Yes,
I have
sir.
deep voice, it's all right.
Okay. No, but Alistair will be after me.
I don't want Alistair.
No.
So, based on everything we've heard tonight, do Lynn and Lori have any final perspectives or things that they've heard that they wish they knew or could help us with from their perspectives?
So who's going first? Lori.
When I was working as a nurse, we didn't have MAID as a law. And there were many times I wish that we would have, because I had patients that would say, I want to die. I want you to give me something to make me die. And we were not able to do that, and it could have prevented a lot of suffering.
Thank you.
No, I found everything was in order. We did it as it should be done, and everything was in place without any issues at all. So I'm thankful that it was there, and thankful that we've done it. No regrets.
Yes.
I have a
friend that does some advanced care. She's a family physician in Toronto, and she recommended a book for me, and I got it on Amazon for $10, and it's called I'm Dead, Now What? And any information at all about me is in the book. My husband's worried that someone's going to break into our house and steal it, but it's there for the family if they want. $10.
I'm dead, now what? So you're taking notes. How are we doing? Anybody else? Anything pressing? Have you found this to be helpful, informative? Yes? Getting a thumbs up over there, that's good. So on behalf of everybody here at Trinity United Church and on behalf of everybody that came out tonight, we would like to personally thank you for your knowledge and your expertise and your stories. And I would like to conclude, I didn't really mean to put you off, Linda, but I just felt that that was a question that required a little more time with, that commandment. So, but I thought Dr. Small did a really great job. She said, we're not killing, we're ending the suffering. And I thought that really was very significant. Well, I'd like to close tonight with a scripture, and it's from the Old Testament, Ecclesiastes, chapter 3. For everything there is a season, a time for everything underneath the sun, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up that which has been planted, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to break down and a time to build up, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them in, a time to embrace and a time to abstain from embracing, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away, a time to tear and a time to mend, a time for silence and a time for speech, a time to love and a time not to love, a time for war and a time for peace. And these three things remain: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. So go in peace and go in love. And as we say on Sunday morning, be good to one another. Thank you, everybody.